What would you do if the man you married, the father of your child, looked you in the eye and called you and your daughter freeloaders? For Rochelle, that moment shattered everything she thought she knew about love, respect, and marriage. But instead of breaking down, she reached for something far stronger than tears. She reached for the locks on her own doors. And when Philip came home that night, expecting obedience, what he found waiting would change their family forever. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about a fight, it's a story about dignity, power, and a woman who refused to be erased in her own home. The day Philip Crawford called me and our little girl freeloaders was the day the air inside my chest changed forever. My name is Rochelle, and for nearly 8 years I believed I had built a life worth protecting. I believed I was a wife, a partner, a woman loved. That illusion cracked open on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when his voice, dripping with contempt, slashed across the phone line. Not just at me, but at Zoe, our 5-year-old daughter, the child I carried, the child we both once promised to love without measure. He didn't say our child. He said, your kid. And in those 2 words, I realized the man standing at the altar years ago was a stranger I no longer knew. That morning had started like so many others. Philip, neat as ever in his pressed shirt, had kissed me goodbye before heading to his office job. There was a faint chill in his gesture, like affection delivered out of habit rather than love. I ignored it because that's what I'd been doing for months, shrinking myself, excusing his moods, telling myself stress was the culprit. The truth I hadn't wanted to admit was that the man who once courted me with roses and promises now carried resentment in his eyes each time he looked at me. It wasn't always this way. When Zoe came along, we both agreed that the cost of daycare was suffocating. Every dollar I earned at the marketing firm bled straight into babysitters and long commutes that left Zoe in someone else's arms instead of mine. I left that job not because I was lazy, not because I lacked ambition, but because we both agreed Zoe deserved stability and love more than the 4 walls of a daycare. At first, Philip nodded, said he understood, even said, we'll manage this together. But together dissolved quickly into me versus you. The comments began small, dressed up as jokes. Must be nice to watch daytime TV while I keep the lights on. Or, I guess you're on permanent vacation. Each line sliced deeper than he knew. Or maybe he did know, and that was the point. What cut sharper than his words was the way he delivered them, always after a tense sigh, always with that quiet smirk that suggested he thought less of me, less of us. And beneath those words there was something uglier, unspoken but heavy in the air. The suggestion that because I was a black woman, staying home with our child was proof of laziness, dependence, some stereotype he'd never dared voice out loud before. That Tuesday afternoon my phone lit up with his name. I answered, forcing cheer into my voice, hoping maybe this call would be different. Hey Philip, I said, adjusting the laptop where I had just finished another job application, my 12th that week. But his voice cut straight through me, cold and precise. $200 at Target? What did you waste it on this time? His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, the way a boss scolds an employee. I tried to steady my breath, explaining gently that Zoe had outgrown her shoes, that we were running low on essentials. I stretched every dollar, I told him, but my explanation barely left my lips before he erupted. You and your kid just spend. Like I'm made of money. Your kid. Not our daughter. Not Zoe. My kid, as if she was mine alone. As if she was an unwanted burden dragging him down. I froze, phone trembling in my hand, while Zoe's soft laughter with her dolls hushed into silence. She looked at me wide-eyed, sensing the storm in her father's voice even through the distance of a phone. My heart cracked in a way I had never felt. Not because he insulted me, I had grown used to the digs, but because he had just placed that cruelty onto our child. Philip, I whispered. What did you just say? You heard me. I'm tired of supporting freeloaders who give nothing back. You sit at home all day while I bust my back and you call that contributing? His voice rose so loud I pulled the phone away from my ear, but not before Zoe heard enough. My baby, 5 years old, sat clutching her doll with tears welling. And in that instant, I knew something irreversible had shifted. Daddy's mad? She asked, her voice breaking, as if she were apologizing for existing. I knelt down, gathering her into my arms, whispering, No, baby, you are not the problem. You are never the problem. But my hands shook with rage I couldn't hide. The call ended with a threat. He said he was cutting off my access to the bank account, that if I wanted money I could ask like the dependent I was. The line went dead, but the silence it left was loud. For the first time in years I wasn't just hurt. I was awake. In that moment, the fog of excuses I had been living under cleared. I saw the truth of who Philip had become, or maybe who he had always been, hiding behind charm and ambition. My sister Tanisha's words echoed in my memory from months earlier. Rochelle, control over money is control over you. Don't let him twist that knife. I had brushed her off, embarrassed, unwilling to believe the man I married could ever be that cruel. But now the proof was in my shaking hands, in my daughter's frightened eyes. This wasn't just about bills. This was about dignity. About racism seeping into the bones of a marriage that should have been sacred. About a little girl growing up hearing she and her mother were freeloaders in their own home. I pressed Zoe's curls against my cheek, steadying my breath. Somewhere between her soft sniffles and my pounding heartbeat, the clarity came. I couldn't undo Philip's words, but I could decide what they meant for me. He thought he had all the power because his paycheck carried his name. But he was about to learn that a woman's worth cannot be measured in dollars alone, and that a lock can do more than secure a door, can reclaim a life. After that phone call, I sat still for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator and Zoe's small sniffles the only sounds in the house. My fingers traced the wood grain of the table as if I could ground myself in something steady, something that wouldn't collapse beneath me. Philip's words echoed in my mind: freeloader, dependent, your kid, and each repetition pressed harder against my chest. The man who once whispered that I was his world now spoke to me as though I were nothing more than a weight chained to his ankle. And yet the cruelty wasn't new, not really. It had been creeping in for months, weaving itself into the corners of our marriage until I had stopped noticing where love ended and resentment began. That day only tore the veil away. I remembered the first time I heard the edge in his tone. It was late summer, and the air conditioning had broken. I was sweating through the evening while cooking dinner when he walked in, loosened his tie and muttered, "At least one of us gets to sit at home all day." I laughed it off, trying to believe it was a joke. But it didn't feel like one. From then on, the comments multiplied. Each grocery bill was a battlefield. Each electric payment a weapon. I was suddenly on trial for the crime of existing without a paycheck. And yet, underneath those words, there was something more poisonous: the unspoken accusation that because I was black, my labor, my sacrifices, even my love were less worthy. He didn't have to say it outright. It hung in the way his voice shifted when he talked about his colleagues' wives who worked full-time, the way he compared me to them as if my worth were on a sliding scale he controlled. The hardest part wasn't his scorn, it was the way Zoe began to absorb it. One night, while I tucked her into bed, she asked in a small voice, "Mommy, are we poor?" My heart nearly broke. We had a warm home, food on the table, her dolls lined neatly on the shelf, yet she felt the sting of her father's disdain. Children don't need numbers to understand when something isn't right. They feel it in the tension that lingers after an argument, in the sharpness of a slammed door. That night I kissed her forehead and promised her we had everything we needed, but inside I wondered if I had already failed her. I thought about the sacrifices I had made without hesitation. Leaving my job wasn't about surrendering ambition, it was about shielding Zoe from a system that would have swallowed her childhood whole. The commute, the long hours, the endless daycare bills, they had drained me more than the work itself. And yet, Philip had agreed at the time, had nodded while saying we were making the best decision for the family. How quickly that agreement had transformed into ammunition. The financial strain was real, yes. I wasn't blind to the growing expenses, to the careful budgeting that seemed to shrink with each passing month. But money wasn't the true issue. The issue was respect. He no longer saw me as a partner. He saw me as an expense. And when he looked at Zoe, the child who bore both of our features, he saw something even worse: a reminder of responsibility he resented. That realization burned through me like fire. In the evenings after Zoe was asleep, I would sit alone scrolling through remote job listings, sending out our SMS that disappeared into silence. Rejection emails trickled in, or more often, nothing at all. Each unanswered application felt like proof to him that I wasn't trying. But the truth was I had sent out dozens, each one crafted late into the night while he slept. I carried the weight of being invisible twice, once in the job market, and again in my own home. The phone call that afternoon had only pulled the mask away. When he said he would cut me off from the bank account, it wasn't just a threat about money, it was a declaration that he believed he owned me. That my access to survival itself was his to grant or take away. I had heard stories about financial abuse before, but never thought it would find me in my own kitchen, with my husband's voice spitting venom through the line. My sister Tanisha's warnings suddenly rang like bells. She had told me more than once that control disguised as responsibility was still control. I had brushed her off, ashamed, insisting Philip just needed time. Now I saw she had been right all along. That evening when Zoe climbed into my lap with her favorite storybook, I felt the trembling of her small body pressed against mine. She didn't ask about her father, but her silence said enough. I stroked her hair, heart pounding with both rage and clarity. I couldn't change what Philip had said, but I could make sure my daughter never believed it. I could show her that worth is not defined by a paycheck, and dignity cannot be taken unless you hand it over. The thought terrified me and yet filled me with a strange calm. For months I had been drowning in his contempt, gasping for air between his accusations. But in that quiet moment with Zoe, I realized I still had choices. I could keep shrinking until there was nothing left of me but the version of myself he had decided to see, or I could remind him, and remind myself exactly who I was. As Zoe drifted to sleep, I whispered into the dark, more to myself than to her. We are not freeloaders. We are the heart of this home. My voice trembled, but the conviction was real. And for the first time in a long time, I began to see the outline of a plan forming. Not revenge, not escape, but reclamation. Because if Philip Crawford thought he could reduce me to nothing, he was about to learn just how much strength hides in the woman he underestimated. That night, long after Zoe had fallen asleep with her doll clutched to her chest, I sat alone at the dining table with a pen and a pad of paper. The house was quiet, but inside me a storm raged. Every cruel word Philip had spoken replayed in my mind, and with each echo my chest tightened. He had called us freeloaders, dismissed my worth, reduced my daughter to a burden. But for the first time, instead of breaking me, his words fueled me. I decided I would no longer let him write the story of who I was. If he wanted to measure everything in numbers, then I would show him numbers he could not deny. I started by listing everything I did in a single day, everything he dismissed as sitting at home. At the top of the page I wrote childcare. Then I paused, thinking of the mornings spent braiding Zoe's hair, the afternoons soothing her fever, the countless hours reading to her, teaching her letters, guiding her through the small but endless milestones of childhood. I searched online for the cost of a full-time nanny in our city. $60,000 a year, sometimes more. My hand shook as I wrote it down. That was just one role. Next I wrote housekeeping. Every load of laundry folded, every bathroom scrubbed, every dinner table cleared and wiped. The endless cycle of cleaning that no one noticed until it wasn't done. I found the figure for a part-time housekeeper and added it to the page. $15,000 annually. Then I added groceries and meal planning. I thought about the hours spent clipping coupons, checking prices, preparing meals balanced enough to keep Zoe healthy and strong. A personal chef would cost $25,000. Then came scheduling, paying bills, managing doctor's appointments, arranging Zoe's school enrollment. All the small threads that held our lives together. Another $30,000 if someone else were hired to do it. By the time I put my pen down, the number staring back at me was staggering. $130,000. That was the value of the work I performed for our family every single year, unpaid and unseen. Philip's salary barely reached $75,000. My breath caught, not because I didn't believe it, but because for so long I had allowed myself to forget. I had internalized his lies. I had begun to believe that without a paycheck, I was invisible. But the truth was in front of me, written in black ink. My labor wasn't invisible. It was priceless. I closed my eyes and let the tears come, hot and heavy, not just from anger but from relief. For months I had been carrying a weight I couldn't name, a gnawing doubt that maybe he was right. But here it was, the proof that I had been worthy all along. When Zoe stirred in her sleep and whimpered softly, I rushed to her side, smoothing her curls as she turned over. My chest swelled with a vow I whispered into the dark. You will never grow up thinking your mother is less than. You will never grow up believing his words. The next morning I called my sister Tanisha. Her voice was sharp with anger when I told her about the phone call, about the words he had hurled at me, about him calling Zoe your kid. There was a silence on the line before she spoke. Rochelle, that is abuse. Don't let anyone tell you different. He's not just being cruel, he's trying to control you. Hearing her say the word out loud, abuse, made my throat close. I had avoided it for so long, afraid it would make the situation real. But deep down I had known. Tanisha told me she would stand by me no matter what. Just hearing her certainty gave me strength. Then I called Sandra, an old friend who worked as a family law attorney. I asked her hypothetically, what would happen if someone decided to change the locks on a home that belonged to both spouses? She paused, her tone careful. If both names are on the deed, both have equal rights. But Rochelle, are we talking about you? I dodged the question, but she pressed. If you do this, you need to document everything. You need witnesses. And you need to be prepared for the fallout. Her words didn't scare me. They clarified the stakes. I thanked her, hung up, and looked around the house, the walls I had painted, the curtains I had chosen, the space I had turned into a home. If Philip thought this house was his alone, he was about to learn the truth. Later, as Zoe colored quietly at the kitchen table, I pulled on my coat and told her we were going out. At the hardware store, I walked straight to the aisle lined with locks, running my fingers over the boxes until I found the heaviest deadbolts. The man behind the counter raised his brows when he rang them up. You planning to keep someone out, ma'am? I met his gaze and replied evenly, you could say that. My heart pounded as I carried the bag out, but for the first time in months it wasn't fear pulsing through me. It was resolve. Back at home, while Zoe hummed softly over her crayons, I spread out the tools on the floor. The first click of the screwdriver in the front door was like a drumbeat inside my chest. Every turn of the screw was a declaration. I will not be silenced. I will not be diminished. This home belongs to me as much as it does to him, and I will guard it like a fortress. By the time the first new lock slid into place, I felt lighter than I had in months. The sound of it clicking shut wasn't just metal meeting metal. It was dignity meeting defiance. The locks clicked into place one by one, each turn of the screwdriver steadying me in ways I hadn't expected. When the last door was finished, I sat back on the floor, sweat dampening my brow, my arms aching but my heart stronger than it had been in months. I looked at Zoe sitting cross-legged with her crayons scattered around her, her small voice humming a tune while she colored a picture of a house with bright windows and a smiling sun. For a moment I wondered if she would remember this day years from now, if she would recall the sound of me working at the door, the sharp scent of new metal, the quiet determination that filled the air. I hoped she would remember it not as a day of fear, but as the day her mother decided to stand tall. By late afternoon, I had gathered Philip's spare keys from the counter, slipped them into a small box, and added some of his things, a few shirts, his shaving kit, his phone charger. It wasn't about throwing him away, it was about drawing a line. My sister Tanisha arrived just as I slid the box near the front door. Her eyes widened when she saw the new locks. "Girl, you really did it," she whispered, her voice a mix of shock and pride. I nodded, though inside I trembled. Having her there made me feel less alone. Less like I was staging an impossible battle by myself. As the clock crept toward evening, the air in the house thickened with anticipation. I tried to distract myself by making Zoe's dinner, but every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock sent a shiver through me. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the curtains, my heart pounded so hard I pressed a hand against my chest. Zoe was upstairs in her room, safe with her toys, and Tanisha positioned herself near the kitchen doorway, ready if I needed her. I stood by the front door, every muscle taut. The sound of Philip's key scraping against the new lock sent an electric charge down my spine. He tried once, twice, then cursed under his breath. The handle rattled violently. "Rochelle, what the hell is going on? Why won't my key work?" His voice was already rising, already carrying that sharp edge that used to send me into silence. But I wasn't silent now. "Your key doesn't work because I changed the locks," I answered, my voice firm though my knees trembled. There was a pause on the other side of the door before his fist slammed against it. "Are you insane? Open this door right now." I closed my eyes, steadied my breath, and spoke louder. "No, Philip. Not until you understand. You called me and Zoe freeloaders like we're parasites in the home we've built together. If we're just freeloaders, then you shouldn't mind being locked out of what's yours. The silence that followed stretched so long I could hear my own pulse. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. Rochelle, don't push me. Open this door before I call the police. A bitter laugh escaped me. Call them. My name is on the deed too. You want to tell them why you think I don't belong in my own home. He cursed again, kicking the porch railing so hard the wood groaned. Behind me, Tanisha's presence anchored me, her hand lightly resting on my shoulder. I drew strength from her steadiness, from the knowledge that someone was here to witness the truth of what I was facing. I pressed my lips close to the door, speaking words I had rehearsed in my head the night before. You say I don't contribute. Let me tell you what I've contributed. Childcare worth $60,000 a year. Housekeeping and cooking worth another $40,000. Scheduling bills management worth $30,000 more. $130,000 worth of value, Philip. That's what I provide while you bring in 75. The pounding stopped. For the first time, his silence wasn't seething, it was uncertain. I seized it. So tell me again who the freeloader is. Tell me how you can look our daughter in the eye after calling her your kid, as though she's not yours too. She heard you, Philip. She heard every word. My voice cracked then, not from weakness, but from the unbearable truth of it. I thought of Zoe's wide eyes, the way her little body had gone stiff when his shouts spilled through the phone. That image burned hotter than any rage, and it gave me the courage to keep speaking. From the other side of the door, his voice came smaller now, less certain. Rochelle. I didn't mean it like that. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. Yes, you did. You've meant it for months. Every dig, every accusation, every way you tried to make me feel less than. And maybe I let you, maybe I believed the lies you fed me. But not anymore. You don't get to define me. You don't get to erase what I bring to this family. And you don't get to wound Zoe with your bitterness. I heard the sound of him sitting down heavily on the porch steps. The quiet stretched, broken only by the faint sound of Zoe's footsteps upstairs as she padded toward her room. Tanisha squeezed my shoulder. You're stronger than you think, she whispered. And I knew she was right. I bent down, slid the box of his belongings closer to the door, and spoke softly but firmly. Until you learn respect, until you deal with the poison inside you, you don't get to walk back through this door. This house is no longer a place where cruelty gets a key. The words left me trembling, but they were mine. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the door between us not as a barrier but as protection. When Philip sank onto the porch steps that night, the weight of his silence pressed heavier than all his shouting ever had. I stayed by the door, my back against it, my palms flat against the cool wood, steadying my breath. Inside me 1,000 feelings wrestled: fear, sadness, anger, but above them all was a calm resolve I had never felt before. For once I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't explaining, justifying, or begging. I was standing firm, and that firmness echoed through every corner of the house like a heartbeat. Upstairs, Zoe had finally fallen asleep, her little body safe from the storm, and I knew I had done the right thing. The days that followed were a blur of awkward logistics and raw emotions. Philip called, pleaded, argued, apologized in fragments, but I didn't let him back inside. He stayed with his brother, his belongings reduced to the small box I had left by the door. It was strange at first, waking up without his presence in the house, but instead of emptiness I felt something else: space. Space to breathe, to think, to reclaim the parts of myself I had buried beneath his constant criticism. Zoe noticed the change too. She clung to me more tightly in those first days, asking quiet questions about when her daddy was coming home, but slowly, as the shouting stopped and the tension lifted, she began to laugh again. Her drawings grew brighter. She stopped asking if we were poor. Philip didn't give up easily. One evening he stood on the porch again, not pounding, not yelling, but speaking through the door in a voice that sounded almost foreign. Rochelle, I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. I don't want to lose this family. I didn't answer right away. My heart ached because part of me still loved the man I had married, the man who once held our newborn daughter with tears in his eyes. But love without respect is a cage, and I refused to step back inside. Instead, I told him the truth. If you want to be part of this home again, you have to rebuild it from the ground up. That means facing what you said, facing the racism in your words, facing the way you've tried to control me. Until then, this door stays closed. For weeks, he went to therapy sessions, at first reluctantly, then more consistently. He began sending me notes about what he was learning about financial abuse, about how his words had wounded not only me but Zoe. I didn't trust it immediately. Words are easy, change is not. But slowly I saw the difference. When he spoke to Zoe on the phone, his voice was softer. He apologized to her, told her she was his daughter, his joy, and that he was sorry for ever making her feel unwanted. I cried quietly, listening from the doorway, not because I forgave everything, but because I saw the possibility of a man who was trying, really trying, to face himself. 6 months later, the house looked the same from the outside, but inside everything had shifted. Philip had returned, not with demands but with humility. We sat through counseling sessions together, airing years of wounds and missteps. It was messy and painful, but it was also necessary. Slowly, trust grew again, not the blind trust of before, but a stronger, more guarded trust built on honesty. I started my own consulting work from home, something flexible that let me provide financially while still being there for Zoe. He picked up extra shifts to ease the burden. For the first time in years, it felt like partnership instead of hierarchy. But the locks, I never changed them back. They stayed as they were, gleaming reminders on every door. Not out of spite, but as a symbol. They reminded me every morning that respect was not optional, that my worth was not negotiable, that Zoe's dignity was not up for debate. Sometimes, when I turned the key myself, I felt a small surge of pride, remembering that night when I drew the line and refused to let cruelty cross it again. Zoe doesn't remember the details of that day anymore. She doesn't remember the shouting through the phone or the tears in my lap. What she does remember is that her mommy stood tall. She sees a father who now kneels to her height when he speaks, who listens instead of yells, who reads bedtime stories without glancing at his phone. She sees parents who argue, yes, but who do it with respect. And she sees a mother who knows her value, who will never again let anyone call her a freeloader in her own home. Sometimes I think about the women who sit in silence, shrinking under words that cut as deep as fists, waiting for someone to notice their pain. To those women, I want to say this. Your value cannot be erased by a paycheck. Your worth cannot be defined by someone else's anger, and your children deserve to see you stand tall. That night when I changed the locks, I didn't just protect my home. I reclaimed my life. I showed my daughter that love without respect is not love at all. And I reminded myself that no matter how tightly someone tries to close your world around you, you can always find the key. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs the reminder that worth can never be measured by money. Subscribe for more powerful stories that prove dignity always wins in the end. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Rochelle's place that night? Would you have changed the locks? Or chosen a different way to fight back?